Bula Vinaka and welcome to this episode of Nations Business. This week, the Minister responsible for Finance, Mr. Suva Business Community, in a program designed to look at economic policies and agenda. According to the Minister for Finance, global economic activity is experiencing a broad-based and sharper than expected slowdown with high inflation as Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the lingering COVID-19 pandemic all weigh heavily on the economic outlook. In a public lecture held in Suva, the Minister for Finance, Honorable Biman Prasad, Minister responsible for External Trade, Cooperatives, SMEs, Honorable Manoa Kamikamida, and Economic Professor Pravesh Narayan shared their views on the work needed to boost economic growth and national development. All that and more are coming up in this episode of Nations Business. Development of niche markets and new initiatives can further support the fight against inflation by improving productivity and easing supply constraints as the world is in a volatile period where economic, geopolitical, and ecological changes all impact the global outlook.
And I want to thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming in such large numbers. Your presence actually shows confidence and your drive and energy to be part of the economic agenda and the recovery that we all want to pursue and beyond. The theme of this lecture is, in my view, particularly apt at this juncture because of the multiple challenges that our international and domestic economy is currently facing, including, of course, entrenched global inflationary pressures and slowing global growth. The prolonged spillover effects of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the lingering threat of COVID-19. This year, the International Monetary Fund expects global growth to slow to 2.7% from the 3% recorded in 2022. The World Bank has now revised its global growth for 2023 down to 1.7% yesterday. So the global economy for 2023 is not looking good. The muted growth projection for 2023 reflects rising interest rates, tighter financial conditions as central banks in advanced economies attempt to tame inflation. The ongoing war in Ukraine and an anticipated simultaneous slowdown of economic growth in the US, the EU, and China this year. The global slowdown is expected to trickle down to the domestic economy, with real GDP growth of 6% expected this year after a strong recovery of 15.6% last year, of course, from a very low base. For 2024 and 2025, growth is expected to moderate to 3.8% and 2.4% respectively. I wish to highlight that the economy will only return to pre-COVID levels in 2024. The near-term outlook is marred by persistently high inflation, particularly for food and fuel, escalating geopolitical crisis, tensions, and the ongoing climate crisis. And I think that given that backdrop, given the current prevailing circumstances, this is a very timely forum, a timely lecture to discuss some of these issues. The first point I want to make is about economic diversification. If there is one thing that the pandemic has taught us, and that is that we cannot achieve economic sustainability by putting all our eggs in one basket. Now is the time, therefore, to recalibrate our domestic economy by putting in a more sustainable growth trajectory. We cannot, and I emphasize that we cannot continue to rely on the tourism sector as the sole driver of economic growth in our country. Instead, we must pursue a more broad-based approach to growth with a focus on diversifying the economy. We need to focus on the agriculture sector. We need to also revive the sugar industry. We need to nurture and support new industries like BPO. We had some very good discussion last night, some excellent presentations from colleagues from India about the prospects of BPO and other information-related economic possibilities, light manufacturing and other areas where we have comparative advantage. In the agricultural sector, large-scale commercialization, I think we have talked about this before, there's been some discussion, but it has to be pursued with a little bit more vigor, with the view to raise productivity and be able to compete in the export market and to be able to meet the demand, the local demand for our tourism industry. At the same time, smallholder farms can continue to serve the domestic market with possibilities of upscaling. Development of niche markets and services for exports has to be pursued. This includes organic agricultural produce, agro-processing, premium quality garments, increasing the range of tourism products, sports tourism, cruise tourism, wedding tourism, retirement villages, medical tourism, conference tourism, regional communications and transport services, and many other new sector initiatives. Many of you know this. And to support the development of sports tourism, investment in new sporting facilities built to international standards is vital together with increased accommodation capacity. For the resource-based sectors like forestry and fisheries, greater value addition should be promoted. I know we've been talking about it before. I'm not sure that we have reached our full potential and whether the trajectory is on a path to achieving full potential, so we need to look at that as well. Sustainable ecotourism venture has to be supported to promote our unique flora and fauna, cultural events, adventure activities such as whale and dolphin watching or fishing. Promotion of traditional handicrafts, natural body products, local ceramic ware, exotic herbs, spices offer a great opportunity for women and small entrepreneurs which are critical for economic development. We will need to move away from the past model of public sector-driven growth towards a more sustainable model of private sector-led growth, particularly for SMEs and export-oriented businesses, aided, of course, by a conducive legislative environment and appropriate targeted government support, including infrastructure, skill development, access to markets, and policy stability and consistency. In light of this, the new coalition government is ready to listen, because we believe listening to people like yourselves and everyone else around all the sectors of the economy is very, very important. So this government is ready to listen to what is needed for the private sector to take the lead role.
The Minister for External Trade, Cooperatives and SMEs, Deputy Prime Minister Manoa Kamikamica, immediately noticed the changes needed to usher in the ease of doing business in Fiji under the current context. In the public lecture, Honorable Kamikamica called on the removal of unnecessary regulatory compliance that hinders the ease of doing business. He also highlighted the need for increasing trade volume and diversifying of exports.
Where do we want Fiji to be in the next 10 to 20 years? What will be tomorrow like if we all work together and create a new future economically together? To strengthen our economic resilience and remain competitive in the face of economic challenges, we need to identify new opportunities, build new engines of growth. This includes developing policies to trigger transformational effort. In order to overcome the obstacles of the 21st century and better understand the needs of Fiji, we need to see things in a fresh perspective. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share my thoughts on some strategies for Fiji. This one is actually an old one. Ease of doing business. We all know the importance of investments and its centrality to Fiji's economic growth and sustainable development. It has the potential to translate into widespread benefits, such as the enhancement of productive capacity, job creation, and improvements in the standard of living and transfer of technology and know-how. It is imperative that we make doing business easier. In the 3 weeks since I've taken office, I have had several key meetings with key stakeholders, and I have noticed that there are still major bottlenecks for investors that discourage new investment and reinvestment activities in Fiji. And this is hindering investment, as you all know. We need to resolve these issues. We need to harmonize and streamline processes and remove bottlenecks. One of my top priorities, and I'll be looking forward to all of you to help me, is to currently work out ways to solve the issues of unnecessary regulatory compliance and administrative requirements to ensure that we start conducting business easier. Just to give you an example, when we got into office, we got a call from Lauvala. They had been issued a stop order in September with absolutely no explanation why the stop order was issued. As we all know, Lauvala is represented by one of the richest men in the world, and it was causing concern. So thanks to the Prime Minister, thanks to Mr. Ngavoka, we all got our heads together and we released the stop order on Monday. Lauvala is back constructing a hangar that's worth about 30 million. They had already spent 9 million. Unfortunately, I think we will be doing a lot of that in the next few months, just trying to remove bottlenecks. Dials is another one that I was just working on Monday. And this is the reality of what we are facing right now, but I know and I'm convinced that together we will put to bed some of the concerns that we've had for some time. By diversifying Fiji's exports so that they spread across a large number of products and trading partners. In order to do this, it is vital to build competitive advantages, and this is possible by redirecting incentives and initiatives. This will include initiatives and programs to build capacities in MSMEs to engage in cross-border trade. It is also absolutely important for us to look into the diversification of supply chains to better prepare for and mitigate effects of disruptions in the future. In recent years, global supply chains have experienced a series of disruptions and have contributed to broader economic uncertainty. Over-reliance on a single source of supply was greatly tested during the COVID-19 pandemic, where countries were unable to access critical supplies. It makes more sense to diversify supply chains through nearshoring or exploring other countries that offer an economically viable alternative. By spreading sourcing, production, and shipping of goods and services across economically and geographically diverse nations, the risk of a single country shocking global supply chains due to natural or political factors is significantly lowered. It is also important to have risk management and continuity plans in place that involve the private sector in order to avoid supply chain disruptions. New threats such as cyber ransom attacks emerging alongside more traditional and long acknowledged supply risks such as supplier bankruptcy. Transport and logistics services are the backbone to trade. Hence, investments in improving transport infrastructure are absolutely critical to ensuring that supply chains disruption is mitigated. When we talk about logistics, the current challenges with the global freight system comes to mind in every business. International shipping rates are at an all-time high. Although the COVID-19 pandemic is to blame, Fiji businesses have been reeling with this problem since pre-COVID times. Hence, it is vital to explore innovative approaches to resolving long-standing issues such as these. In today's day and age, every country needs economic and food security. Therefore, import substitution is key to restoring and creating food independence in Fiji. Fiji is already self-sufficient in pork, canned meat, and chicken. The business model can be studied and replicated to other agricultural livestock and crops. Economic models like sustainable smallholder integration have been seen as a successful approach by large businesses such as Goodman Fielder and British American Tobacco, providing raw materials and capacity building to farmers to support their businesses as a whole. These types of models reduce the uncertainty related to farming activities. It aims to integrate smallholders into commercial value chains in response to this broad spectrum of risks and trade-offs.
Human capital refers to the value of the human resources within an organization. It includes all skills, know-how, core competencies, and experience of each employee, and this value isn't often reflected in the company's balance sheet. Brain drain or loss of people to greener pastures is often seen as loss of skills and knowledge. This decreases both human and intellectual capital. Employee retention in an organization or country is therefore crucial for strengthening intellectual capital. Economic professor Pravesh Narayan shares his views on the direct impact of the loss of intellectual capital.
We have talked about capital-led growth, and there's nothing new. But intellectual capital is all these laborers that we lose to Australia, New Zealand, US, Canada, and so forth. So there is, an increasing rate of loss of human capital. It's not only the human capital we are losing, but the intellectual capital, which is the total value of that particular person who leaves Fiji for the entire lifespan. So I did some simulations. I obviously don't have data. I did some simulations to estimate what has been Fiji's loss from intellectual capital that has left Fiji. It's about anywhere between 12 billion to 13.5 billion. This is simulated data based on some assumptions. So at the minimum, we have lost $12 billion worth of intellectual capital. And that is huge. So what we should be doing is using this, or maybe a study needs to be done, not on simulated data, of course, based on real data, that looks at the cost-benefit analysis of all our bilateral relationships with Australia, New Zealand, US, and so forth. Because there's a perception with the donors that they are giving us more than what we are giving them. It may be true, but that difference may not be statistically significant. So we need a study to actually identify what is the benefit to Australia from the human capital we give them, and then what is the benefit we get from the development assistance that we get from Australia. Like I said, at least 12 billion loss in intellectual capital is a huge drain. And that's not looking at other spillover effects or backward and forward linkages that are there with that type of loss. What it means is that for future negotiations with our bilateral trading partners, we need to factor this loss and seek for a compensation. So in other words, I'm thinking about treating the intellectual capital as an export market. If we can formalize that, and it's not too difficult to see how we can do that, it becomes an export market because that's what we are doing. We are exporting labor. We are exporting labor on a permanent basis. And if we classify that as an export category, we can then negotiate with the donors for a level of compensation. Of course, it comes down to some sort of formula that we can do that. And I think that, because it will be an export sector, it will help us with foreign reserves and so forth.
Enhancing financial institutions to boost economic growth is important for a country like ours. Professor Pravesh Narayan believes banks can be encouraged to do more than just conventional strategies in helping national development.
The Fiji National Provident Fund is a very, very important institution for us, and it has got a lot of members' funds there. About 40% of those funds are in equities. And that's 40% is about 2 billion, close to 2 billion Fiji dollars. If we can use that for more investment opportunities, I think that is going to be, not only beneficial for the members, but also something like if the FNPF becomes a shareholder in a tertiary hospital, for instance. Cost of a 100-bed tertiary hospital would be about $200 million, Fijian dollars, roughly, thereabouts. And we've got $2 billion of FNPF funds that are in equities. An investment in a hospital is not going to be a loss-making investment. So something for FNPF to think about, using the role of institutions to boost economic growth, right? I think that's one of the things, and of course we have got the banking sector. One of the things I spoke to the governor today was talking about liquidity in the banking sector. That is true. The liquidity has been quite healthy. One of the reasons that has been the case is because of the remittance. One of the things I would like banks to do as part of contributing to national development is to tell us how they can contribute to national development. Because banks, quite rightfully, they're commercially minded and they have to. The objective function is either to make profit or to minimize loss. And there's nothing wrong in that because that's how they survive. So banks have not done anything innovative in trying to contribute to national development. When we were in the COVID crisis, banks, as they do in crises, they freeze mortgages and allow interest payments and so forth. So, those are conventional strategies of banks. What we need to hear from banks, in light of the liquidity that is there, how they can contribute. And that relates to the SME sector because 80% of our businesses are in that category of SMEs. For them to access loans has become more and more challenging, and this has been the reality. So if we're going to, as the Deputy Prime Minister was saying, if we're going to enhance the contribution and enhance the sustainability of the SME sector, access to finance is going to be one of the key things. And we need to be looking at the banks, including our local bank, HFC, how that partnership can work. So there needs to be something innovative. So this is what I'm saying, that with 80% SME-driven economy, banks have a bigger role to play. And we have to understand in this conversation that we are having that the major challenge for the SME sector is insurance. And they are, of course, impacted by climate change. To get insurance for SME sector in light of climate change is even more demanding, even more financially demanding. So this is where I think we need to connect with the banks, is to encourage them to be innovative and to see how they can contribute to the SME sector.
Setting and adjusting the level can be the most challenging part of minimum wage fixing. If set too low, minimum wages will have little effect in protecting workers and their families against poverty. If set too high, minimum wages will be poorly complied with or have adverse employment effects. A balanced and evidence-based approach is necessary, which takes into account, on the one hand, the needs of workers and their families, and on the other hand, the employer and economic factors. Professor Narayan is of the view that minimum wage should be set in consultation with both employers and employees.
The minimum wage that we have in Fiji, I have problems with that because one thing I don't understand how that minimum wage has come about. And those minimum wages don't actually make sense. When you look at some of the wage rates there, it does not make sense. The reason is because I managed to have a brief audience with the person who was contributing to that. And one of the issues is the methodology. I think, because the minimum wage rate should be set in consultation with employers and employees. You need to ensure that the minimum wages is set in a way that respects the financial position, first of all, of the business, and also the expectations of the workers. For a good example is this, that if your cash flow is 30% of your total sales, let's say, and if you are basing the minimum wage rate on your cash flows, just one example, it could be a number of different factors, we should know at what percentage of the cash flow, whether it's 30% or 25%, you should be able to pay a higher wage rate. First of all, we need to know whether a company is able to pay a higher wage rate or not, right? Cash flows can be looked at deciding that. Borrowing constraints can also be looked at. So there needs to be a number of factors from a company's point of view, from a business's point of view, that needs to be looked at to, first of all, decide what is the maximum capability for this particular business to actually pay a particular wage rate, right? Then the next question is how much you can pay, right? That's a separate question. So my issue with the minimum wage rate is that it is not at the moment linked to the, I would say, the corporate performance of the businesses. I'm not saying that the businesses should be paying more. The simple question that I ask is that if you have a minimum wage rate of $4.44, how did you get to 44 cents? I just wanted an explanation on that 44 cents. Right? So there needs to be another look at the minimum wage rate setting, because that has got a direct impact on not only investments coming into the country, but also on productivity. We need to respect the contribution of the workers so that they are in a position where they feel that they're contributing to not only the firms or the company's growth, but also to the national growth. So I think there's a mismatch there that we need to fix that. But that is for the relevant ministry to look at. So I thought that I should mention that, because a lot of the things we talk about, if we don't get the minimum wage rate right, then that is going to have a negative effect on the other things we want to do.
And that was the show for this week. Be sure to join us again next week as we bring you more of government's involvement on national development. Have a productive week, stay safe, and Mother Manda.